coffee is an incredibly complex plant, and when processed and roasted properly, can create really interesting and dynamic cups. We here at Sagebrush feel that a conical brewer, such as the Hario V60 specifically, is capable of emulating and displaying these interesting flavor profiles the best. So today I'll be walking through what we do on bar to make our pour over recipe, as well as some tips and tricks of how to do that well. Primarily, this is a video for onboarding training for our baristas, but hopefully you watching at home can use what we have as a standardized recipe as a kind of launch point for what you can do with pour overs, what you can tweak, and what you can play with. Hopefully our tips and tricks as far as standardizing, making consistent, and producing high clarity, nice bright acidic cups can be something that you enjoy as well. So let's go ahead and get started. On our second camera, I can show you what exactly we have on bar. So we've got two interesting things. This is called an atomizer, or just a regular spray bottle. It sprays water. We'll just be using water for that. Touch on what that means in a bit. This is also just a normal chopstick. It's a stainless steel one, so easier to clean. This is just a glass pitcher that we'll be using for pouring the cups right through. And then we'll have a dosing cup. Right now I just have a cupping bowl because I don't have the stainless steel one that goes with my grinder. But if you have a nicer grinder, typically they include a dosing cup. If you are interested, there's plenty on Amazon for a nice low price. So dosing cups are helpful if you want to do just single cup brews. Otherwise, you can pretty much use any glorified bowl. It doesn't really matter. So in case you haven't already noticed, what I have written out here is going to be our on-bar recipe for each of the coffees that we have available for pour over. And this is something that we've found to be the best for putting on display nice, bold, thick-bodied coffees, as well as interesting and complex nuanced coffees. We think it's a good recipe for kind of the baseline of each of those, and if that's something you want to tweak with, you can play with each of these depending on what coffees you have. But for us, we found that given our roast profiles, given the coffees that we source, this is the best, most general profile that we can present with our pour overs. So I'll walk through it real quick. So I have what's split in this quadrants, the differences in regular and large sizes. So we offer a 12-ounce pour over as well as a 20-ounce pour over, and iced and hot. So we offer a hot pour over as well as an iced pour over. Now these each have differences because the differences in extraction are greatly affected if you're adding more coffee or adding more water, and they're greatly affected if you're creating a higher concentration of coffee to dilute with ice to make sure that it's not melting down after you're done brewing. So for our hot regular, which is our most commonly ordered pour over, we have a 70-gram bloom, which is about 3 times the amount of coffee that we have dosed out for the standard dose of the brew. And then we have a 130-gram pour up to 200 grams on your scale, and then a 150-gram pour up to 350 grams on your scale. And that's what you're shooting for the final gram amount of the water on your cup. Now I say gram amount because if you're brewing at home, you ought to be using a kitchen scale every single time you brew, because it's the best in ensuring that you're getting consistent cups every single day, and it's also a helpful guideline for understanding how to create better cups as you progress in your brewing and understand a bit more of the nuances of each of them. If you're not using a scale, then you can either eyeball it or use volume or whatever. No matter what, it's going to be a less consistent way to getting the same amount of coffee, the same amount of water in your brew every single time than any other method. For our large, we start with a larger dose of coffee, 34 grams, and it's easier to remember if you're a barista on bar, the sequential 2-3 or 3-4. That makes it easy to remember. It's about 50% more of the dose, and that inherently creates about 50% more in the final cup as well. We try to maintain about a 15-to-1 ratio in our brews. There's people who enjoy a 16-to-1 ratio, a 17-to-1 ratio. There's people who go as far as like 18 or 19-to-1 ratios. That is in reference to the amount of water there is to coffee. And For our large pour overs, we'll be dosing out about 34 grams of coffee, followed by 525 grams of water. So that produces about a 490 to 475 gram brew and produces about a 15-to-1 ratio. Now, ratios are something that you can play with. I would say this is the most optimal way to toy around with your brewing if you're brewing at home, because playing with how much you're dosing out of the coffee versus how much water you're adding is something that is really easy to change, very objective in your changes, and also helps in you kind of getting an understanding of extraction and the differences that come out in the final cup versus the way that you're extracting your coffee. For us, we find this ratio to be the most helpful in the consistency of what we have currently on bar, and that's that. For the iced pour overs, this is where it gets a little tricky. So our grind size is going to be much finer, a pretty significant portion finer, to allow for more of those coffee particles to be extracted within a 250 gram pour. Now, we have the same dose amount, so it's going to be a much higher concentration of coffee within this brew, but when we pair it with 100 grams of ice being put into the bottom of the pitcher here, that will automatically dilute it into the coffee particle amount that is consistent to that of a hot regular. And that is the same with the large as well. So what this means basically is when we were dialing in this recipe, we used a TDS meter, which I think I have it somewhere. It's not here. It's probably in the storage closet. But we were using a TDS meter to ensure that the extraction that we were achieving out of the large iced is the same as the large hot. And what the extraction that we were achieving out of the iced regular was the same as the hot regular. So those differences are something that we have honed in and tried to dial in properly. And that's with the EK43 grinder that we use on bar. So this is something that you're going to have to play with at home if you use it at home, but it's not something that a barista necessarily has to worry with, because it's something that we've dialed in. So now this is worth noting for baristas, is our EK43 setting, we have it calibrated. And so a regular hot is going to use a 10.5 grind size, and an iced hot is going to use an 8.5 grind size. Now, this is consistent hot, or this is consistent regular and large, and consistent regular and large for iced, but it is not consistent between hot and iced. So just bear that in mind when you're brewing a hot pour over. You're going to need to be using the 10.5 amount for the EK43, as well as the 8.5 for the iced pour overs that you're doing. Now that was a lot, but it's a helpful guideline for kind of a baseline understanding of how we set up our brew recipe. And now we'll just go ahead and get started. So I'll move to camera B to show what I'm doing with my filter, but what we don't want is for this crease to affect the extraction that we're getting out of the Hario. We want this paper to be attached to the Hario V60 as much as possible. And to do so, we'll put our finger in here like this, and we'll kind of reverse crease down the line here. And this will make this little flat flush to the brewer and create a much more concrete conical shape within the brewer. We have 208 degrees water right here. And what we're gonna do is wet the filter. So I'm gonna go ahead and start in the middle. I want the gravity of the water to weigh down the filter as much as possible and get it fully attached to the ridges of the pour over. Grab a paper towel, splash a little bit here. Now what this does is both heat the brewer, but most importantly, like I said, get the paper attached to the lines of the Hario V60 as much as possible. And once that's wetted, we can go ahead and dose out our cup of coffee. And I'll go ahead, for example's sake, make a regular hot. This is our most commonly ordered, and this is the best for a single cup hot brew recipe. And I will dose out about 23 grams of coffee. Now, this is one of the most important parts when it comes to brewing at home, is using the RDT method, which is the Ross droplet technique. This has been found to greatly reduce retention within your grinder, as well as reduce the static that comes out of your grinder. and helps with workflow to alleviate any of the headache that you might get with coffee grounds kind of going everywhere. So when it comes to being on bar, we have a very high RPM grinder that can produce a lot of static and a lot of coffee grounds going everywhere. So ensure as a barista, as well as a home user, that you're giving a spray bottle spray into your coffee. I'm gonna go ahead and give 2 sprays here and then uncover and ensure that the water is getting distributed across the coffee. I'm gonna go ahead and dump this in here and grind. So I have this set to the grind level already. And for the barista, just remember that for the EK43, for a hot flavor, we're grinding at 10.5. For an iced, we're grinding at 8.5. If your grinder has a knocker, ensure to use that before you are done with that. And this is where the chopstick comes in. So I'll demonstrate on camera 2 as well. We'll be setting the pour over down onto our workspace and then kind of dose that coffee into the Hario V60. You can see I'm grinding 2. I'll let that settle. And then I'll place the chopstick. Now it's very important to not press the chopstick downward. We don't want to break the filter at the bottom, but we'll use this chopstick as kind of a guideline for creating a spiral within the bed of grounds. So I'm going to start from the outside and work my way in, almost like creating a cinnamon roll, like that. If you can see there on camera 2, that's going to be kind of what you achieve. Now we'll move everything back here. But what this does is ensure that there's even extraction happening in the bloom as we're brewing. And we've found a significant difference in the brightness and clarity of our cups when we do this versus when we don't. So that's primary reasoning why we do it. Is ultimately, it's primary reason why you do anything brewing related is to make your coffee taste better. So for our kettle, we're using 208. It's highly recommended to use a gooseneck kettle with a slow flow rate to reduce the amount of intense agitation that we get from the kettle. So that's why a gooseneck kettle is recommended. For us, we use 208 because it's a bit off boil. It's certainly a higher extraction yield with the hotter the coffee or the hotter the water that you get. And so for us, we have very clean coffees that can allow for that. And that's why we do that. I'll start with the bloom. Like I said, we're doing 70 grams, which is 3x the amount of the dose that you have. Now, this is something I certainly want to touch on, is the priority of ensuring that this bed of grounds is fully saturated is higher than the priority that we have for a 70 gram pour for the bloom. What I mean is, I'm going to go ahead and start pouring. We'll start down the center here. What I mean is, if I get to 70 grams and I'm not fully saturating the bed of grounds, say for example that I'm at 70 grams right now, but I still have some dry coffee grounds, so I work my way up to 93. Certainly 70 is the goal, but what this does, and I'll start a timer here at 45 seconds. What this does is ensure that the water is interacting with the entirety of the coffee that we have in the pour over. If that's not happening, then it's going to create an uneven extraction as we brew all the more. So just know that of higher priority, it's to get this bed saturated as you bloom. And if you saw, I set a 45-second timer. This is another one of those things where it's a good baseline for us, but there's certainly variation from coffee to coffee, even from the roast date, to affect what is optimal for the bloom. But we've found 45 is the best kind of baseline guideline for the bloom time. And it allows baristas to hop off the manual brew bar and go help out for at least 45 seconds and then circle back and give that second pour. So we're going to do a slow flow rate up to 200 as that recipe says. And as you see in camera B, I'm working my way from the center to the outside to get to 200. And this is key. We want some agitation to happen in the form of giving the pour over a swirl. So I swirled it just a few times. What that does is remove some of the fines onto the sides of the pour over and hopefully reduce the risk of those entering the final cup, as well as allow for the bed of grounds to settle evenly as opposed to it being kind of all wonky within the brewer. And once we get a glimpse, once I can physically see the grounds, that's going to be the best guideline for consistency because each coffee is going to brew at a different drawdown time. Now that I can see the coffee grounds through the water, I'm going to go ahead and do that exact same swirl pattern, starting from the center and working my way outward. And then I'm going to go ahead and work my way back inward here until we get to 350. Once we're at 350, we'll give it another swirl here, again, to reduce the risk of fines entering the cup. Because your coffee will be pretty full, ensure that you're not over swirling it to cause coffee grounds to seep into the inside of the filter and get grounds inside the cup. We don't want that to happen. And that's about it as far as the brew recipe goes for a regular hot. We just go ahead and wait for the drawdown to happen. So we grab a cup, go ahead and taste it real quick. The grinder I'm not particularly familiar with. We have it dialed in for our EK43, but nice high clarity, good bold mouthfeel with still a lot of nuance in the high end. We get a lot of florality, a lot of florals, as well as a bit of like interesting melon sweetness and a good like jammy thickness as well. So good stuff, good stuff. You know, there's plenty of trends, there's plenty of quirks and fun things to play with, new technology, lots of that. But the Hario V60 has been around for decades, and we just still find it to be the highest, just most dependable daily driver for producing high clarity, nice, complex, interesting cups of coffee. So hopefully this breakdown was helpful. As a brewer at home, know that this isn't the end all be all. It's all a matter of understanding the techniques that come with brewing and being able to tweak with what you have and use it to your greatest strengths and brew the cups that you prefer. So if you found this to be helpful, we can walk through some of our other barista training recipes, as well as just some tips and tricks for workflow and for efficiency and things like that. So if that's something you're interested in, throw a comment down below, and thanks for checking us out. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I hope you have a great day.